Hey everyone, I've got a new type of video coming for you. Well, not completely new, is more of the fact that I just don't do very many of these types of videos. What we're looking at today is we're looking at video number 1 in a series of challenge lock making. What's going on here? Well, I've had a lot of people ask questions about what things do you consider when you're making a challenge lock. So, I put together a list, and it might break down into 2 or 3 videos as to, what we're going to look for in a lock. And, for the first video, I figured we'd look at 3 things. We'd look at key bitting, binding order, and pin stacks. And those are, 3 pretty important things right there. That's why I wanted to hit those first. Is key bitting. Some people don't really know what we mean by key bitting. It's B-I-T-T-I-N-G, and it is the bit of a key. So I've got 3 examples here of different key bittings, and these are all, Schlage style keys. And I've got an example of what I would call a poor challenge lock bitting right here on top. The middle one would be a decent challenge lock bitting. And the one on bottom would be a very good challenge lock bitting. And, well, what makes it a good bitting? Well, the first thing is rakeability. You stick a rake in a challenge lock that has an even bitting like this, and your chances of getting it open are much higher. The third key right there, with those very deep cuts right there in the middle, those will make for a much more difficult raking experience. And let me explain this just a little bit. Okay, let me see which one I have here in the front, which would be, I think, the easy one. Yep, okay. So, in this little holder right here, I've got the cylinder all pinned up with 6 pins. And as you can tell, it is the, the very even looking key. And you want to take a rake in here and rake it. You notice that, I'm not oversetting these pins a lot, except for this guy right here, but that changes with the angle a little bit. You see, I'm bringing more of these pins to the shear line rather than oversetting them with this little city rake here. And it would be a little bit easier to describe with a little bit less restrictive keyway than a Schlage, but this one right here will illustrate it nicely. See, I brought the city rake up, and you see it brings some of them right near the shear line, and the other ones are way above it. So if you try to rake this lock, you're going to wind up oversetting 2 of these pins. Regardless of where you stick this rake in here, you're going to wind up oversetting something, no matter what angle, how fast you move it, or whatever. Is it still possible to rake a lock like this? Yes, it is. It's going to take a lot more time, and delaying the attack is the name of the game here with challenge locks. So we make it harder to rake. That way people will go to, single pin picking. They'll use a hook similar to this one. Well, this is a Sparrow's short hook. Or they'll use a steep hook or whatever hook they desire, DeForest or whatever. This particular one is in 15 thousandths, and I chose this one because 15 thousandths works very well with Schlage keyways, as you can go in all the way from the bottom and reach every pin without having to rest on this edge. 20 thousandths in some Schlage type keyways works. It's a little bit tricky, and 18 thousandths works in most Schlage keyways. But that's just one little demonstration there. And that's what we're talking about with our key bitting. Just making sure that the bitting is making it more difficult to rake the lock. And secondarily, it is making it more difficult to pick the lock, because you have to have the right pick to fit in the keyway to reach past these low cut pins. So this one definitely isn't the right pick for that, but let's see here, this one would be. See how I can easily reach past that low cut to get in there? Alright, the next major thing we want to talk about is actually a pretty easy thing to get the grasp of. The next thing would be, well, your pin stacks. When you look at the pin stacks in a lock, and let me bring my pinning tray forward here. Okay, now I've got the pinning tray more forward here, and I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. That way make it all see a little bit easier. There's a couple of things to avoid with your pin stacks. A is you don't want a really short key pin with a really short driver. And the reason of that being, both of these pins will fit inside the plug here and make it to where you don't have to pick that chamber. And short is just not a good way to go, guys. Another thing to avoid would be a long and a long. Well, if a short's bad, well, why would a long and a long be bad? Well, a long and a long actually robs you of space. What happens is you run out of space in your Bible for this pin and this pin to both ride up on the key when you insert the key into the lock. Now, if you're not planning on using a key with this lock, and you don't have a key, and it's going to be just straight up challenge lock, then yeah, you can sneak by with a long and a long, as long as you take into consideration that with your spring taking up extra space, which I'll set one up here, when that spring compresses, it still takes up about that much space, about how far I got my tweezers spread apart here. So I'd say that's just a little bit over 1/8 of an inch. And I have a feeling that this is still going to want to ride below that shear line. You may not even be able to get the plug back into the Bible with that setup, if it is too long. One thing you want to consider in that case, say for instance, you do want to go long, you still need a spring, you can go half spring. And well, half spring is going to take up a lot less space when it compresses, and you'll have a little bit more wiggle room. The next option would be no spring. No spring's a little bit tricky, guys, because it will only rely on gravity to keep the pin down. If the key gets cockeyed just ever so slightly, say you threaded the chamber that one's in, and the key gets cockeyed ever so slightly, it's going to be out of the way, and you're not going to have to worry about picking it, and it's going to be a little mistake. So what are we looking for with these locks? Well, we're looking for balanced pin stacks, and this is kind of the extreme. And I'll set these side by side. And you can tell that those pin stacks are fairly balanced. The one on the left may be just a hair longer than the one on the right there, but it makes up a big difference when you're looking for room in a lock. And secondarily, when you're looking for something tricky, you can put more stuff above a short pin to get more clicks, more reaction, more different false sets and everything if you have a longer driver with a shorter pin. If you have a really long pin and this pin, say like an overset trap pin, well, you're really only going to be able to move it maybe about 1 millimeter before, you know, it's set. Well, a couple of millimeters, I guess, but not very far. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about, you know, balanced pin stacks. It makes a lot of good difference. It really makes for the lock becoming a better, more secure lock. And it can also make the picking a little bit more challenging. Okay, let me slide that out of the way and zoom back out. And zoom out, and zoom out. My phone's not liking me right now. There we go. All right, the next thing we want to look at is, well, binding order. Well, Yes, binding order is very, very important in a lock, especially a challenge lock. You want to set your pins up in a certain way to where you know how your pins are going to bind and be affected by the picking. That way you can plan out where to put your spools, where to put your serrations, where to put counter milling into the plug, all sorts of different things. And for instance, this is kind of an example of bad binding orders. Is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But you know this lock binds in that order, and you can actually change the order of the binding with your custom made pins or with different security pins you put in the lock. The pins are kind of what makes up the binding order. If you put in a slightly narrower driver in, well, that driver is going to bind at a little bit different time than it did originally. Say I put a spool in chamber 1. Well, that spool won't always bind first. It will be a little bit of an offset, and it'll wait for that wall, for that shear line to come to it before you can pick it. The same thing goes for T-pins and when you have counter milled chambers. So these are just a few things to look at when you're wanting to build a challenge lock. And, you know, this is just a part 1 of a series here, guys. In the second part, I'm probably going to go through making some decisions as far as factory security pins and maybe threaded chambers on the plug and in the Bible, and how to, in this instance, get these top caps off of the Bible without destroying the lock. The third video, I'm going to do 3 videos. The 3 videos are going to cover all custom made pins, different techniques for making custom pins, different tools to use when cutting them, and different materials that you can use to make custom pins. And I think that might round out this series fairly well. But in the meantime, guys, stay safe, don't do anything illegal, and as always, please like, comment, and subscribe.